Looking at my first slide here, that's a favorite picture of mine of the Virginia. And it says there I'm a naval architect and a professional engineer, but really I'm just a guy who loves boats. And I particularly like traditional boats. And I've been involved with them for a lot of years and hope to continue being involved with a bunch more. If, as I'm going through, anybody has any questions, please raise your hand or wait until afterwards, it doesn't matter. And I want to say a little bit about what I'm going to talk about tonight. When Jim asked me to give this talk, he said, you can talk about anything you want to. But since I'm the designer, I really ought to be talking about the design of the Virginia. And I thought, well, I could talk about the design of the Virginia and all the nitty-gritty details and so on. And there might be one or two of you in the audience who are actually interested in some of those details. And so what I thought was, I'd really like to talk about the whole process of designing it. And that's what I'm going to talk about, and hopefully you'll enjoy it. The design process. There are three basic elements that go into the design of the Virginia. The first, historical research, and that was extensive, very important to the end product that's sitting out there on the pier. The second is Coast Guard rules and regulations. In order for the vessel to be useful, she needs to be able to carry people, passengers, school kids, whatever, and unless she's Coast Guard certified for passengers, she really can't do very much. And then the third is the naval architect who interprets those two things, the historical research and the Coast Guard rules, and puts them all into one vessel. Now, the historical research and the Coast Guard rules weren't always at exact opposites, but they were a good deal of the time. And so it was all a compromise to make it all come together. Okay, my design objectives, and the naval architect starts out with, what are my objectives? What am I trying to accomplish? And you can see here, I want it to be historically correct, obviously. Got to meet Coast Guard regulations. Needs to carry a bunch of people. In addition to that, it needed to have auxiliary power to be able to operate in the Kennebec River. And I've known the Kennebec River has some current in it, and I was very fortunate this afternoon to experience some of that. And I think it was an excellent idea that she has auxiliary power. And we needed crew accommodations so that if she went visiting to other ports, there was a place for the crew to stay. Okay, the working design, and this is pretty much what we know about Virginia. A lot of work, dedicated work in the library, and a lot of work from a lot of different people, both in this country and in England. Because, of course, the settlers and the builders of the original Virginia came from England, and they brought much of what they needed to have to build her with them from England. So she's really an English vessel. Now, what do we know about her? Well, Hunt made a map of the Popham colony. And my understanding is that he was a French guy, not an English guy, and probably a spy. But he recorded pretty well what the colony was supposed to look like. And down in the corner, there's a little over on the left side, halfway up, there's turned sideways, is a little sketch of a vessel, which we assume to be Virginia. And then on the right is the blow-up of it. And if you look at that sketch, and you look at the Virginia sitting out there in the water, they look pretty similar. And John Bradford is the one who got me involved with this project. He's an amateur historian, amateur archaeologist. He'd done a lot of archaeology work at the Popham colony, and he did a tremendous amount of research about this particular vessel. And the reason why the vessel looks the way she does and does what she does is a big credit to John Bradford. And I must admit, I had a wonderful time working with him. And thinking about working with him, kind of an aside story, I see Rob sitting in the back of the group, Stevens, who is a shipwright, and partway through the design process, John thought we needed to have a design review and get a couple of experts in. And so he wanted to get a shipwright, and he wanted to get a tall ship captain who would know a lot about ships, both their construction and their operation. Well, Rob Stevens was the shipwright that he hired to come in and look at it. And Steve Cobb, fairly well-known tall ship captain, were the crew that looked at it. And they looked through my design and sail plans and stuff. And one of the things that they looked at was, they said, the bowsprit, it's wrong. It doesn't have a bobstay on it. And a bobstay is the line that goes from the end of the bowsprit down to the stem. And John kind of perked up and looked at him, and he said, that's true, but they didn't figure that out for another 150 years. The little bit that we know about her was that she was a pretty pinnace of some 30 tons. And so that, and the little sketch on that map, is all the information that we really had to start with. Wow. The rest of it, John was able to piece together and did an excellent job at doing it. John Bradford published his research in the book that you see there. And if anybody's interested in the details of how the whole ship works and how the design and so on, it is a wonderful document. For most of you, it'd probably be good bedtime reading, because you'd be asleep within a few minutes. But he did an excellent job, and I have used it extensively in my part of designing the vessel. This was a drawing that John put together, and to show the design process that was used to shape the hull of the ship. And you see that there are 4 big frames, and those are called mold frames. And so the vessel, the original Virginia, 1607, I believe that Digby, who was the shipwright that they brought with them, probably had these mold frames built in England, then disassembled and brought over here along with a bunch of the equipment that he would need to put the vessel together. And when he got here, then they'd cut out a big piece of oak, set up a keel, set these frames on it, and that would be the way they did it. And this, you can see that there's some arcs, lines there, and the whole way that she was designed was by a series of arcs that were drawn to get the shape of that cross-section hull. Another thing that John Bradford did in the process was he hired an English naval architect by the name of Fred Walker to take what research he could find and come up with a design that would be the Virginia. And this was his drawing of that. And he's got an extensive design package, which is quite fascinating if you're really into that. Okay, so now this is not the same rig that's on our Virginia out here. This is a deep sea rig with a square sail. We've got the coastal rig with a spritsail main. Okay, so the next thing, that's the historical research that was done. Now we got to get into the Coast Guard rules. And the Coast Guard rules are all about, you're not supposed to kill anybody.
That's a good point.
And if in doubt, be more conservative. So a lot of things, and this is just kind of the first page, and if you think this is difficult to read, try reading that whole book and figure out what it really means. Okay, what the Coast Guard required was drawings and calculations, which was my to do. We had to look at what cargo it was going to carry. In 1607, the cargo was in the hold, and it was fish, or it was trading goods, or it was produce, or whatever. For us, the cargo is people on deck, and that's a very, very different load situation, and made for a lot of compromises. Stability, and that's the big one here, because if you've got a bunch of stuff down in the hold that doesn't walk around, versus a bunch of people up on deck who, if they see a whale on one side, all go to the other side.
Oh, yeah.
Stability becomes very, very important. And the only way that I can find to create the stability necessary is to put a heavy lead shoe on the bottom of the vessel. And we also needed her to be able to have auxiliary propulsion, particularly for operation in the Kennebec. So she has a good sized diesel engine in her. The structure, in the slide that I showed you a minute ago, you saw that she had 4 mold frames. And the way that she would have been set up with those 4 mold frames, then they would have started planking at the bottom of the ship. And after they'd gotten a few planks in, then they'd throw pieces of frame in and attach them to the planking, but not to each other. And it's called loose futtock construction. And loose futtock construction is relatively fast to do, and it's easy, but no way was I going to get the Coast Guard to approve it. General arrangement, we had to have watertight bulkheads. We had to have the engine room, obviously, crew quarters. The original boat was probably totally open under deck. This one, we've got watertight bulkheads, so presumably any one compartment can be flooded and she'll stay afloat. She also needed a bunch of safety equipment, which I doubt the first Virginia had. Okay, and next, the third part is designing the Virginia. And that looks amazingly like me, I guess.
Your twin.
And I'm kind of an old school naval architect. I like to design things on paper. I like working on my drawing board. I really don't like working with computers. And I've figured out that I don't really have to. And fortunately, with some of the vessels that really needed to be put on a computer, I was able to figure out what to put on the computer, and then find a young engineer who was really good with computers and get him or her to put it on the computer. And that has worked out great for me, and so on. Okay, so how did I influence this whole design? Well, I had to mold it all together, and so my experiences in life have entered into this whole design also. So that's where it started. That was my first design and build project when I was about 10 years old. My grandfather helped me for about a week to build a little scow, and he didn't know what he'd unleashed. Another project that has had a great deal of influence to me on this particular vessel is the privateer defense. The privateer defense was part of the Penobscot expedition. And I don't know whether, are many of you aware of the Penobscot expedition of 1779, where the British captured Castine, which is where I live, up the coast, couple hours. Maine was part of Massachusetts at that time. The Massachusetts General Assembly decided they needed to do something about it. They amassed a fleet of 40 ships, half of them transports, half of them warships, and headed up to Castine. And things didn't go very well. The upshot of it was a British relief squadron showed up, and all of these ships scattered and went up the river as far as Bangor. The crews scuttled them and went home to Massachusetts through the woods. Except for one vessel, and that was a privateer known as the Defense. And she was a brig, about 80 feet long, and she slipped in behind Sears Island, which is just kind of at the mouth of the Penobscot River, with the idea that there were 7 British ships following this fleet of 40, and they'd obviously go up, follow them, and the defense would be able to then come out from behind Sears Island and go home. One of the British ships followed her in.
Oh, no.
So the crew scuttled her. A couple of hundred years later, I was very fortunate to be involved with a group that did an underwater archaeological project. I spent 9 years digging this out of the mud and this little book, which I've shown here, called Underwater Dig, is a really nice little book. It's kind of written at the middle school level, a lot of pictures, good description and stuff, and it's at a level I can understand. And so if anybody's interested in learning more about it, that's an excellent resource. And then the other one that influenced me a great deal was the HMS Bounty. And she was a replica built by MGM to film the 1960s version of Mutiny on the Bounty with Marlon Brando and Trevor Howard and so on. And the film company planned on burning the ship on the shore at Pitcairn Island, which is what the mutineers had done many years before. Marlon Brando got the word that they were going to burn the ship, and he said, if you burn that ship, I'm walking off. And so MGM kept it. Many years later, Ted Turner, with his old movie channel, he bought up all of MGM's old movies. And one day his accountant came to him and says, why do I keep getting the bills for a dockage on a ship? And they had transferred the ship to him along with the movie. And then it went through a number of owners. But the last one, I got involved with the total rebuild of her, which took place over a course of about 10 years. And I was fortunate to spend a lot of time working on her, surveying her, doing a lot of design work on her, and also got to make a number of trips on her. So I got some experience with square rigs that was invaluable with working on the Virginia. Okay, so my original design in 2004 consisted of a lines drawing, which gives the shape of the vessel, a construction drawing, which shows basically how she was constructed, an arrangement, I think that's pretty, and a sail plan. So here's the lines drawing that I came up with. And this is based on the drawing that I showed you earlier, plus trying to make sure she had adequate stability, and on and on and on, put it all together. Well, this is an unusual shape. I had not designed a boat of this particular shape or vintage before. So one of the things I did was built a half model of it, of the shape, so I could look at it in 3 dimensions rather than 2 dimensions. And looking at that, it looked pretty good, so carried on. And this is the midships drawing, and this shows basically how the vessel is constructed, with her frames and her planking and her decks, and deck beams and all of that. Here are a couple of the double futtock frames that are in that vessel out there.
Wow.
And I put this up here because that's what the mold frames would have looked like. Now, Virginia has all of her frames built like this, whereas the original Virginia had only 4 frames built like this. The Virginia loose futtock construction. And one of the interesting things that I came across in excavating the defense was she was built a couple of hundred years later than the Virginia originally, but she was loose futtock construction. And I had thought that had gone out of favor long before the American Revolution. But the defense was very, very hurriedly built. And this was a much quicker way to build it than doing all double futtock construction and stuff. And so in the privateering business, when it becomes possible to go privateering, if you want to make some money, you got to get out there right away. And so she was built very, very hurriedly. But it gave me some insight into how that construction works.
This is water, not rum if you want that.
More of them.
Just
Merci.
water.
Well done.
Thank you. And then you can see the other things here: planking, decking, fastenings, bars, etc. Now, the other plan that we need to show the construction is the inboard profile. And so this is looking at a longitudinal section as opposed to a transverse section. But you combine these two drawings and you've got almost all the information you need to build the boat. And I'm hoping Rob's head's going up and down. And also the deck framing. And the sail plan. And this was the sail plan that I originally submitted, so on. So all of these drawings, plus a little bit more, were submitted to the Coast Guard back in '04, and all of it was approved and ready to build it. Well, the original group in 2004 tried to raise the money to be able to have the ship professionally built and then enough money to operate her. That didn't work out. Then another group came along a number of years later and decided, let's just build it. Let's not worry about raising the money. Let's just build it. And that's what you got out there. And it's pretty amazing that a group of volunteers, and I would guess they're what, at least a couple of hundred people have put a lot of effort into building this. Okay, now, the sail plan there, this is a sail rig that I'd never sailed before. I've sailed dinghies with spritsail rigs, but that's a little different than that one out there. And so one of the things that John Bradford and I decided was we really needed to build a sail rigging model to look and see if we could make all of the rigging work. And there's a complex amount of rigging, and we got it kind of all figured out so that it could all work, but knew that there were going to be a lot of lines to deal with. And when I went out sailing on her this afternoon, you know what? There are a lot of lines. The electrical and machinery plans, I decided to not do those in '04 because it was uncertain as to when the vessel would actually be constructed. And knowing that technology's changing, well, between 2004 and 24, if we'd done the electrical plan, we probably couldn't have found a component that's still made.
Right.
During the time between when the plans were originally approved in '04 and a few years ago when we were getting close to finishing the vessel, three things had happened that have influenced the Coast Guard and how they deal with things substantially. And all of them have had substantial effects on what we're doing. The first one was a fire on a vessel called the Conception out in California. And it was an electrical fire. It was, in all probability, a whole bunch of people trying to charge a whole bunch of batteries. This was a dive boat. It carried like 40 divers on it. All of them were sleeping below decks.
Oh.
And they had a 120 volt AC system that was running to charge all of this stuff. I suspect the system was overloaded and a fire resulted. The vessel wasn't really properly run, and the result was that most of the passengers died.
Oh.
And that caused the Coast Guard to change their ideas on electrical systems. The second one, the dismasting of catamarans in Hawaii. The masts, the rigging on those catamarans is absolutely nothing like what the Virginia has. But that hasn't bothered the Coast Guard. They decided that the whole sail plan and the masting and rigging, all of that needed to be carefully reviewed and the design carefully gone through. And the third one was right here in the Kennebec when the Mary E capsized. And that's brought into focus that stability is real important. Okay, so the electrical system, as I said, lots changed, and a simple 12-volt DC system should have been easily approved. And all of the Coast Guard inspected vessels that I've designed before this, a simple one-line diagram with a list of the major components was all that the Coast Guard wanted to see. Well, that changed substantially. And when I submitted that plan to the Coast Guard, I got a 3-page, single-space type thing of everything that was wrong with it.
Oh.
And I looked at it and I said, this is way beyond me. And I was fortunate to be able to get, Maine's first ship, to get Bruce Suppies, who had done a lot of work on the vessel already. And then they recruited Bill Connors, who was a retiring electrical engineer from BIW. And they, over the course of more than a year, put together the plan that finally got approved. But it was monumental. And without them, there wouldn't be an electrical system. The mast and rigging. I had to submit very detailed plans for the masts and the rigging, standing rigging on the vessel, and calculations and so on. And I went back and forth with the Coast Guard, I think 4 times. When I'd submit the plan, they'd come back with all sorts of questions and comments. I'd try to respond to all of them and so on. The upshot of it was, after 4 submittals, they finally approved what I'd originally submitted. But it makes it more difficult doing that. And so this was a sail plan that I submitted along with a lot of calculations and so on. And this shows both the coastal rig in the center and then the deep sea rig over on the right. And that's the Virginia. She is underway. It's been a really great project with really great people to work with, and I think she's got a great future, and I'm just very fortunate to have been able to be involved with it.